I have to make 12 in the morning.
Right.
Yeah, I had a fire.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Hamden Wilbraham Regional School District Planning Committee meeting. It is 5:32 p.m. We will begin with roll call in alphabetical order. Don Davenport. Sean Kennedy.
Here.
Teresa Goodrich. Here. Michelle Boudreau. Here. Is there anyone else who would like to gavel in? Okay.
Motion to convene? We're not posted. We're not posted.
You're not posted.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we didn't post, so we'll call ourselves the board.
Okay. Okay, very good.
Michelle will post it, so we'll.
Okay, thank you very much. If you please stand, we will also for the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to first thank everyone for being here with us this evening, and we will turn it over to the superintendent.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think I'll begin with a little bit of history just to bring everyone up to speed with what this group has been doing. So this is the planning committee meeting that you're at. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is a group that was formed under the auspices of the district strategic plan. Their focus really is around building utilization and strategic plan. First focus has been on building utilization. As part of the process, this group has toured all of the buildings in the district, most of them while students were present, to look at some of the issues that we're facing. And they also have asked me to develop a number of different potential redistricting models based on different types of constraints, which we'll talk about in a little bit. First of all, I'd just like to talk about some of the things that were observed in our tours of the schools, because I think they provide the context for what we're trying to do. We're faced with both building overcrowding in some buildings and underutilization in other buildings. So in Hamden, both TWB and Green Meadows are underutilized far more than capacity. TWB is essentially one classroom with some administrative staff. Green Meadows has underutilization in grades 6 through 8. Very small number of students in those middle school grades. On the other hand, when we looked at some of the schools in Wilbraham, we noticed overcrowding at Mile Tree. There were several instances of closets that had been converted into meeting spaces for staff, sometimes staff and kids. There was one closet that had sort of become their room for doing video conferencing for parents, because that was the only space available. There were a number of just spaces that were crowded in there. However, Mile Tree is constrained in another way as well, which is it's only set up for very young children. When you look at the gymnasium and where first of all, the gymnasium is set up to begin with, it's a small gymnasium. The basketball hoops are low, really constrained on how much that could be done. But also all the plumbing is set up for young people as well. So that's, I think, sort of the key takeaway from that building. We also saw overcrowding evident at Stony Hill. One of the things you'll notice if you tour Stony Hill is there are a number of sheds that have been purchased for the school, which basically are holding all the materials that were displaced from closets that they've had to convert into meeting spaces, either for students or for staff. But I think probably the most significant overcrowding issues at the middle school. The middle school, it's really most apparent if you look at the library, which in this case is not a library. All of the books have been pushed up against the wall to accommodate 3 additional classes that have been sort of jerry-rigged into the middle school. And we'll continue on that path next year based on the current configuration. The other school in Wilbraham is Underhill, that's the high school. So in looking at different adjustments we could make, things that were in our minds were, are there ways that we can take advantage of the spaces that are currently underutilized in order to relieve some of the overcrowding that we see in different buildings? So that's what we started with. And initially, the committee just asked for different options, and so I did it in an unconstrained way. I think our first version of this memo had over 300 different options for reconfiguration because we weren't considering any constraints whatsoever. A lot of those were undesirable just on the face of them. A lot of them had schools that were only pulled in a single grade level, which educationally is not the best because it takes kids about a year to adjust to a change in the school. So just at the point when they'd be sort of getting into the full swing of things, they'd be changing again. So that was not good. And then we also, at some point, had to get realistic about the regional agreement that does constrain options. And so the planning committee asked me to provide some changes if there were no changes to the regional agreement, if we were regionalized in 8 through 12, if we were regionalized 7 through 12, if we were regionalized 6 through 12, or 5 through 12. And there were longer versions of these tables, that's what you have in this memo. But we eliminated some options based on some other things, like, for example, if we had a configuration that had a school with just 1 grade in it, that was thrown out before we got to this level. So this is sort of where we are now in terms of our thinking of different possibilities. So just to explain what's in the memo. First reconfiguration, if you'll notice, they're all numbered and they're not numbered sequentially necessarily because this goes back to the original list of several hundred different options. So the first option that survived is what we called option 2. This would be a change with no changes to the regional agreement. Really, all we could do at that point would be to move the 8th grade to the high school. Now, that really would just be students in Wilbraham who were in 8th grade, or students who had transferred in from Hamden to the middle school could go to high school. So that is if there's no change. The next table looks at some options if you were to regionalize 8 through 12. I should say, for simplification, we threw out the other options, but I just need to make note that they're there. Option 2 is still embedded in all the rest of them, because if you could do something without any changes to the regional agreement, obviously you could do the same thing if there were a change to the regional agreement to make us regionalize 8 through 12. So in this, there are 2 options to look at. One would basically be just the same change that was recognized on the prior page, with the exception that Boone Meadows would now only be pre-K to 7. And then a second version of this, which looked at trying to expand the grade spans at Stony Hill and Sewell Road, based on what I was just talking about, that each transition sets kids back a little bit. So if we could do something to reduce the number of transitions, the thought was that might be desirable. So option 4 expands the number of grades that both Stony Hill and Sewell Road would have. So in this case, the change is it's not all students go to Stony Hill and then all students go to Sewell Road in Wilbraham. There would be a split. Both schools would be 2 to 5, and a line would be drawn somewhere for attendance zones. The next set of options was if we regionalized 7 through 12. And again, option 2, 3, and 4 are embedded in this, but then 5 looks very similar to what you've seen before in number 2 and before in number 3. It basically is maintaining the same setup across the district, moving 8th grade to the high school, and making Green Meadows pre-K 6. And then you see number 6, which essentially replicates what you saw in number 4, the difference being that pre-K is, I'm sorry, the difference between Green Meadows is pre-K to 6 rather than pre-K to 7. If you regionalize 6 through 12, you get 4 additional options. In option 7, you have something we've seen very similar to 2, 3, and 5. Option 8 is similar to what we've seen before in option 4, 6. Again, the main change there is bringing Green Meadows down to pre-K to 5 instead of pre-K to 8. The option 9 and 10 just sort of flips option 7 and 8 and says, well, you could also close the middle school. Oh, I'm sorry, 9 says you could also close the middle school and open TWB, in which case TWB would become a place for all 6 and 7, and that would be one way of addressing the middle school issue. Option 10 is probably the most unique one in this whole configuration. In this one, we would have 2 grades 1 through 5 schools. Those would have to be Sewell and middle school based on their sizes. 6 and 7 would become TWB, and then the high school would be 12 and 8. And then we did look at the high school would be 8 through 12. We did look at regionalizing 5 through 12. That actually becomes really problematic in terms of trying to find a systems approach that makes sense, because what happens is you need a place to catch the 5th graders who would be coming out of Green Meadows. So the only version that makes sense at all and kind of has some downsides is if you had Stony Hill become a 1 through 4 and have Sewell Road become a 1 through 4, with the exception of, I'm sorry, take that back. We got rid of those plans. So we did have one where Sewell Road was sort of catching the 5th graders coming out of Green Meadows, but that's gone from this configuration. What it does have is, and this would be sort of more sensible, is moving grade 5 to the middle school. So then you'd have 5 through 7 at the middle school, 8 through 12 at the high school. However, the problem there is all of our grades are essentially the same number of students. So you're replicating the problem that we currently have of 6 through 8 overcrowding in the high school. This would just be 5 through 7. In the middle school, this would just be 5 through 7 overcrowding in the middle school. So we shared this group of options with staff at our last meeting. Some of the things we've heard, I just want to share with you, is, and this is from staff of Green Meadows, that it's really important to get the middle school out of Green Meadows. It has dwindled to such a small number of students. It's really becoming programmatically difficult to serve them educationally. It's also diverting resources away from students in the lower grades. And for that reason, we were looking at just sort of possible configurations with the regionalization happening in 6 through 12. The other thing we heard from staff is that they would really prefer options where the grade spans are held together. So that would really be option 7. Reasons staff talked to us about is being together as a complete 2nd and 3rd grade team, or a 4th and 5th grade team, or the middle school team, is that you're with all the rest of the people who teach the same content as you do. You have so many more resources you can go to in the building. For professional development, it's simplified because, if you're just focused on, say, 4th and 5th grade content, you know where that professional development is going to be. The teachers are all in the same building already. So that's what we heard from them. The other thing we heard, which would be really helpful, is that, and this probably is also something that could be done without changes to the regional agreement, because we don't believe pre-K is part of the regional agreement, but if we got some space available at Green Meadows, we could move preschool to Green Meadows, which would resolve the overcrowding that we were facing at Mile Tree. So that's basically the history of where we've been since the beginning of this group. Our next meeting is with you all to get your thoughts on the different options that have been put forward so far.
There was another option to regionalize K through 12, keeping these configurations, and then maybe having some Wilbraham residents that live close to Hamden be able to utilize Green Meadows to take the pressure off from Mile Tree and Stony Hill. So that was just, we were talking about it, and I thought this would be a perfect place to throw that out to see what you feel about that as well. I believe the reason that we didn't consider the K-12 move was because families didn't necessarily want kids to cross town lines because they were so young, but some kids are going farther on the bus in the same town, so we just figured that might be an option that really free us up. Sure.
I guess I'll start.
Press the button where it says push.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll start. Having gone through this before, what makes you think it's different than it was 4 or 5 years ago when there was an effort to modify the regional agreement to allow some of these configurations? Not that the premise isn't still good like it was years ago. Do you think, and Sean, you were there for that time?
Oh, yeah.
Do you think the reception would be different?
So it's hard for me to answer that because I wasn't here 5 years ago. What I can say is this is an outgrowth of the strategic plan of the district, which I know had a lot of input and support from both communities. And there's this process that the planning committee has been engaged in to try to vet ideas among different stakeholder groups, and we'll be continuing to do. So I think, process-wise, it might look different, and that might lead to a different outcome.
And also, the big challenge with closing down TWB was moving the kids to Green Meadows and offering a valid education. And I think that we proved that we did that. So now that a lot of kids are moving over and the class size is dwindling, we're hoping that the fact that we've done that, the fact that you will always have a school in Hamden, and that we're taking the time to listen to everyone and take the time to plan it correctly, we're hoping that will allay some of the fears. But that's also one of the reasons we have you here.
Can I just take a step back?
Sure.
Other than the obvious of changing the buildings around, what's the reason? What's the goal? I mean, is it better education? Is it reduce costs? Is it, what's the goal?
It's the first and foremost of everything that we're doing is how can we better education, and the overcrowding at the schools. We're trying to free up that overcrowding because listen, they're doing amazing work at Mile Tree, but yes, they're working out of closets. There's at least 2 closets there. So when we saw that, we were just amazed at how they turned a closet into a beautiful office. I mean, but we need to fix that. And by doing so, we believe that we can close a building, which there will be some cost savings to that, but that was not the reason why we started the process. And this came right from the strategic plan.
So it was to help better educate our students, making sure that we're doing it in the most efficient possible way for our students, reducing transitions, and to eliminate overcrowding.
I mean, I have my own reasons. I have my own reasons, but I wanted to hear from you what your goals were. I mean, that's kind of the,
What are your reasons?
I think what you said, I think hopefully we can improve our education, number one.
Right.
I think we have too many buildings in the district, and I don't think we're using the buildings wisely as they exist.
Especially this one.
So I think there's a lot of reasons to do this, and John, to your point, I hear what you're saying. I think the situation is worsened, and hopefully the residents realize that.
And I agree with you, Mark. I just want to be clear that, we didn't, the path before, we're not going to, relitigate's a bad word. We're not going to go, no, we're not going to go over it again if things haven't changed. I think Sean's point is extremely valuable. Things have worsened. We're working on a closet. We don't have a library because classes are in that.
Right.
We have buildings with underutilization and overutilization. Your goal to make things better for all the children in the district, here are some plans. What does the district want to do as a whole? And you have a group here that collectively represents, if you will, the management of the district. And we're all responsible to the 20,000 people who send their children to our schools. And we need to offer a good plan.
I wanted to speak to your point, Sean. Another consideration towards, it's going to be a big deal to change the regional school agreement. And, it'll maybe a stretch for it to go through successfully. That makes, I think, it worthwhile to consider attempting to change the regional school agreement to include all the grades. And any of these configurations could be, but I think it shows better foresight into the future, because things have changed in the district over the last 5 to 10 years. There's been shifts in how many students are getting enrolled from Hamden versus Wilbraham, and things are going to change in the next 10 years, but we don't know what changes will have. And so we think about, when we embark on this journey, and I think we're going to end up embarking on this journey to change the regional school agreement, and I think it's going to be in the best interest of the children. If we are successful at having the agreement, say regionalization for all the grades, then we will be in the best place to be adaptive and best serve the needs of students as things change over time, and also make efficient use of the buildings. Education is one, but if we are not using our buildings effectively, then that money that's wasted, could have been used to pay another teacher for an elective that could really broaden the minds of kids in the high school or another grade, and another exciting opportunity. So, whenever I talk about cost savings or cost effectiveness, I'm always thinking about, I don't want to see money wasted, because I think we could do something, better with it, something more exciting for the students. And so, anyway, I thought your idea, whether or not it meant students actually changed across state lines, I think there's other reasons that it might be a very good idea to regionalize for all the grades, assuming we could get the towns to come together and agree on it.
If I may, as a member of the strategic planning team, there were two things that came up. I'm sorry, is somebody else that had that? Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe.
There were two things that resonated with me. Number one was inequities with the middle school. There were a lot of concerns the middle school is not a great educational center, Wilbraham Middle School. And the second one that resonated with me was that Green Meadow was a different education than the students in Wilbraham got. And it wasn't just education, it was programs where it would be banned. But those were two things that hit hard for me, and I could pull out notes. But that was two things I remember. I've heard thoughts that this is the best learning center we have. So, and I argue if anybody was arguing the point, but this is the best learning center we have in this place, right? So my argument, I think, would be that we should have as many students as possible in this building. So I mean, there's no argument not to have 8 through 12 here. Have we looked at 7 through 12? Because I looked at, where my
my children are in third and fifth today. I have to look at the enrollment numbers, and it might not be a today item, but as you look down the future, if this school was built for 1,250 students and there's no grade with more than 250, you would think you could potentially put 5 grades in here. And I think there were some of the grades that were 160, 170. You know, my thought would be if there's an option to do that, I think we should consider that if you bring kids into the best learning center we have. So that was just my first flush thought was, what would it take to take a look at first mid-charge being the place you want to pack, because it is the best learning environment, the best field, the best gym, the best library, and then kind of back into the other grades. Because in my mind, I looked at saying, well, if you did that, because you look at 4th, 5th, and 6th, go to Wilbraham Middle School, potentially move 2nd, 3rd into Sewell, and maybe not even need Stony Hill or TWB. Again, just ideas, but I don't know if the enrollment numbers show that, but everything I looked at showed that we could definitely put that many kids in the high school. So I don't know if that was looked at. And I also would say thank you. This is very in-depth what you put together. 300 options is incredible. I think that may came out of it, but I appreciate your time on this.
So I can speak to the question of 7th grade. You're right about the number of students that this school was designed to hold, but those were that number of students in 9 through 12. When you bring in additional grades, you start losing some efficiency at each grade level because of things like many courses at the high school were designed to be multi-grade or can be multi-grade. You can't necessarily have a 7th grader, for example, in a physics class. Right? So the space usage gets to be less efficient when you bring in the other grades, which is why, as I looked at it, I think you can do 8th, but I don't think 7th will fit. The other thing, another just a big thing, I think this came up last time, was lunches. So if you think about the number of lunches, and if you think you probably need to keep the kids separate because they're going to have somewhat separate schedules, you'd have to start basically serving lunch at breakfast, you know. So I think that's why 8th is a good fit. I think there will be some challenges for sure, but I think they're not insurmountable. But when you think about 7th, it's not just like a scale factor where it's linear. Each new grade has like a step up.
Regarding having the 3 grades at Wilbraham Middle School, we noticed that when you put 3 grades in that level, we're in that building specifically, we're in the same position we are today, which there's a tremendous amount of overcrowding there. So we're trying to eliminate that.
They're also using closets for offices in the middle school.
Well, first, kind of building on what Joe mentioned, to have that many creative alternatives and fair access, very acceptable. There's a lot of variables. There's the number of students, there's cost, the logistics of all this. Sure. And overall, that obviously the task of opening up that agreement. Is there an average number, at least on paper, the assumption of closing? Because I noticed pretty much every option has one building closed. Is there an average number that we're thinking, whatever building it is, it's going to save X dollars? You know, that can't be the driving factor, but it's of course one variable of that, right? So I don't know if that's.
I don't think we've gone into the numbers of it yet. I think we really would like to whittle it down to even a few more. And then we can really, once we have, let's say, 2, 3 solid options, then we can dig down into the costs of them. Because right now we're looking at it educationally and for the towns, you know, the whole crossing borders and you know, that's why this is an important meeting.
And I think another factor that will feed into that is what responsibility the district might have for a building that's closed after it's closed. So that would, I think, have to be part of the discussion further down the road.
The only other thing I had to kind of ask as you go forward is all of these buildings have different needs, some more than others, capital needs, roofs, things like that. Again, it can't be the driver, but we'll take variable if one of them needs insert large project here. You know, to kind of weigh that in there.
early in the game, but for my money, configuration number 2, which moves only Wilbraham kids into the high school, is a non-starter. Many years ago, I was in the school improvement committee, or whatever it was called, school council. No, well, the middle school task force, no, I'm talking about the school improvement committee here at the school council here at Minichog. And one of the things we did was climate surveys. And back in those days, the 8th graders from Hampton and the 8th graders from Wilbraham came to the building on different days for their intro at the end of their 8th grade year. That at least has changed, but I think there's still way too many things. And even at that point in time, when the kids were all coming into the building at the same time, there were huge disparities between the comfort levels and degree of sense of acceptance and the like. And I think having a full year in the building for one cohort of kids and the others coming in a year later would be a disaster.
The only reason it's still on and, still being considered, and I think I speak in consensus, is that if there is no changes to the regional agreement.
Well understood.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure.
Can I just say one more thing? Around the neighborhood schools, or to your point, Sean, maybe about regionalizing from kids, I think the more we regionalize, sometimes the better it is, right? The concern I have around that is the lines are arbitrary on where kids go to what schools. And I remember back when we had neighborhood schools, there was a significant disparity between the schools because the crowding in one school, maybe Memorial, I think the class size at one point were like 15 on average, but they were 22 at Sewell, and I'm making these numbers up, they were 22 at Sewell Road, just because the population moved around. And so the only correction to that is to change the line. And that's problematic in itself, because all of a sudden you got a kid in third grade, and now he goes to one school to the next, just before somewhere there's a line. The kids across the street might go to a different school than your son or daughter. So I think that's a problem for a lot of residents, and we have to be careful of that. And I think the same thing could be said, and I don't think people would have a hard time necessarily sending their young student or their young child from Wilbraham to TWB. I think the problem is when it changes, right? I mean, it's arbitrary, and I really get worried about the arbitrary thing. So while I think the notion of neighborhood schools and regionalizing beyond where we're at now is really smart, I think it has some things that we have to deal with, and we need to be prepared for the pushback. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, the teachers brought up that point too about during the neighborhood schools days, and you have one superstar teacher, and amazing, and then the other school has amazing teachers, but you have that crazy superstar over here, and then your algebra is better than our algebra or whatever, so that's why the teachers were really leaning towards the option where we would try to keep the grades together as much as possible, with the exception of Green Meadows. So I don't know how many of you have been in the Green Meadows, but I would say I think Green Meadows is the best school in the district, structure-wise. It's really amazing. It's a beautiful space. I mean, we're talking the kindergarten space has a circular room with windows all out, and everything is at that kindergarten, the small person, level. I noticed actually I'm a little taller, so I noticed the disparity there. But it's great, and it's just it's a really beautiful school. So if we do go with the model that keeps Hamden with a pre-K to 4, 5, 6, or whatever that we decide, it would be great if some people from Wilbraham who want to can go over there and everyone's still in the district. And this is something that I said, and John started to sweat a little bit when I said it, that let's say I want my kid to be part of that school, so I'll have my child go to Green Meadows, or someone who lives in Hamden is like, hey, listen, we love Stony Hill, we love the program, we love the teachers, whatever. We want to have our kid there, like to give more freedom to the parent. Yeah, he's starting to sweat again. Yeah, he's starting to sweat again, right? But it's a consideration. So.
Jeff?
Oh, so I got a couple of thoughts, but before that, I have a question. It's not on this plan here. You had brought up complete regionalization pre-K through 12, but it's not listed here. So
Right.
how serious of a idea is that? Is it just something that you're throwing out there now, or was that something that's been brought up and tabled?
We talked about it at the last meeting, and I did not see it transferred over to here as an option.
So that was just a
That's why I
question.
brought it up.
Curious if it was just an afterthought, or...
No, we talked about it the whole last meeting.
Looking at this whole list here, just going through different options, right off the bat, I think we can narrow some completely off the list. I mean, I'm looking at number 5 and 6, and you got pre-K through 6 at Green Meadows, which forces 7th grade into Wilbraham Middle School for 1 year. That kind of defeats the purpose of trying to lock students in the schools, for multi-years, multifaceted education. So you're going in there for 1 year, it's kind of, you're losing that skill there that John was mentioning. And I think 3 and 4 kind of follow that same thing. I mean, we're grades pre-K through 7 at Green Meadows. I mean, we already have small class sizes there. I don't think that's really addressing the overall concern there. Going down the list, I think, 7 through 10 are probably the best options. However, I kind of like number 10. And the reason being behind that is I think it addresses a lot of things statistically wise. You're getting, longer, grade levels. Students are in school longer periods of time. You're really helping with the overcrowding issues. And not to mention, you're kind of helping with some inequities that have been going on between the two communities. It kind of helps reorganize that a little bit into more of a natural feel. My opinion. I'll leave it at that.
No, that's good.
And just to follow up on that, I think Craig makes a point, but number 15 also, if you're talking about an issue with Wilbraham Middle, where 6th through 8th, 3 grades are crowded, then why is 3 grades and 15 still just as good as Wilbraham Middle? So, the one thing I might make, and Craig makes a good point about 10, but having gone through the upgrade, if you will, of Green Meadow, where we had with older students, wouldn't there be a subsequent downgrade of facilities at Wilbraham Middle to make younger kids able to use the facilities where it's older, like you mentioned, plumbing.
Right.
That's a thing that might be a concern. I mean, of course,
Yeah, we're
Stony
really...
Hill came back and forth in the fall.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember when it was closed, dug in the 90s, was it?
So at Wilbraham Middle School, there's really just 2 bathrooms, right? There's a boys' room and a girls' room, and in the boys' room, there was what, 4, 5 urinals, and I'm like, okay. I mean, I would think that have 3 of those bathrooms would be adequate for the middle school. So, and then also at TWB.
That's just a detail, we did this.
Oh, yeah. We were in, I can say I've been in every single, most of us have been in every single room that the school, every closet we were looking in. I mean, we were really, at TWB, it's going to require a lot of work as well. And then I think, I'd like to, if you don't mind me hijacking this for a quick second, is there any desire for Hamden to take TWB back? Is that something that you would have a need or a want or a use of that, and for something for us to consider?
I think that's outside the realms of this conversation. We're talking about what's best for the students, not what's overall needs of the building.
I thought we were just, okay.
I don't think that's appropriate for this conversation.
What conversation would it be appropriate for?
You got to see where we're going educational-wise, what's available as the district's buildings, and then from there, if there's a need for the building outside of the schools department, we can address that then.
Okay.
Think so, we'll have a separate meeting for that. Stuff, but
Yeah, I agree that the TWB conversation should be secondary to this. And so I had a question about what's the goal for this meeting? To come away with, to take things off the list like Greg is suggesting, and then you guys go back and vet those further for cost and whatnot. So I would support the things that Craig's identified as, probably not the most desirable outcomes.
Yep.
But I'm stuck on Mike's comment from earlier about, do we have one shot at the regional agreement? Is the question. want to go through it multiple times. So, and I do think that, though, that this process, can lead to a different kind of conversation about it. And so, you guys, last week, I'm all about, these relationships are really important, and so how you have the conversation, I think, is really, really critical, and the drivers for it. And so I think I think that the TWB issue can distract from the perspective.
Okay. That's fine. I just thought since we were all here.
One other point is just with one shot at the regional agreement, we need to be looking at the way the costs are proportioned as well. It just needs to be all in one movement through the process.
Is that within the scope of this meeting to address that a little more?
If that's one of the regional agreements, so yes, the assessments.
Okay. So there's some ideas. I'm sorry.
No, that's right. And I respectfully disagree. I think, I understand we want to talk about education. In my opinion, when I'm looking at the makeup of this group in this room currently, this is more about the business side first. So that I'm not saying the focus of the conversation is TWB, but that should be an option, as well as Stony Hill, as well as all the others. Because when you look, this is the finance committee, the advisory committee, the select boards, and a couple members from the school committee. So I think this is more of the business side that then can provide, hopefully, additional funds so that Dr. Provost and the school committee can then make a better educational program for the students. But we've got to kind of, just the way I see this, we have to dig in first ourselves, be able to have the best structure, have one that's efficient, so that then they can do what they do best. Just my opinion.
Can I just ask, John, so I'm kind of stuck on this elementary thing where either we're going to leave it largely status quo, or every 2 years we're going to transition and we're going to have these, or we're going to go to a neighborhood school. I understand your staff has suggested they would rather see it transition every 2 years. But there seems to be, one of the problems I've heard with the educational environment in Wilbraham is that it's your first year in the building or it's your last year in the building. So what's your perspective? Where do you sit on this? I think that's an important, I'm not an educator, so
So I certainly don't want to speak against any of the thoughts that staff had shared, because I think those are all very important. But if you look at research around this, the research would support trying to reduce the number of transitions as much as possible. It takes about, as I said, it takes about a year for students to regain the losses they experience whenever they change schools. So that's why, if you're looking at the color-coded version of this, one of them identifies the options that reduce the number of transitions. So I would, all things considered, I would lean towards that. However, I'll just point out in your last comments, you brought out some of the concerns that brings up, which is you got to draw the line somewhere, right? And inevitably, it's between a child and his best friend who lives in the next house on the other side of the line. That is the tricky part of doing that. So those are the trade-offs, but I would say all things considered, I would, I always go to the evidence base, I always go to research, and it would say that it would be preferable to reduce the number of transitions if we can figure out a way to do that.
and there's no way to keep, put 3 grades in the elementary grades.
No, I'm sorry. No, Stony Hill is one of the ones that we identified as overcrowding. Sewell does have a little bit of extra space, but not enough to absorb a full grade. You could do more Green Meadows, but that would require moving Wilbraham students into Camden, which, is I think in part Sean's comments. We were talking about if we regionalize K through 12, then we would have more options to do that in the future if that becomes a benefit to deal with overcrowding on the overhead side.
To build off your point, Mark, it's interesting because for me, as a 54, soon to be 55-year-old man, you know, spending 2 years in Stony Hill and then 2 years at Sewell Road and 2 years at Wilbraham Middle School, my head's spinning, right? But for my son, who's in Sewell Road, 20% of his life has been in Sewell Road. You know, we say only 2 years. And trust me, my son counts the days that he's in school, but it's a different perspective for the students themselves. You know, we might look like, oh, you're in, you're out, but for the student, it's time is, as we all know, is relative. So I would just say, just to add on to what you said.
I'd like to touch on, if you don't mind, I'd like to touch on the Thornton Burgess thing. Mike, I understand your point, and that's your charge as the finance committee. But in my opinion, I go along with what Craig said there. The school committee and the planning committee, their charge is to come up with the best educational system. Secondary is a financial responsibility, but number one is an educational responsibility. And then they present that to the finance committee, the advisory board, the select board, the select board. They're doing what they're charged to do. Parker does what they're charged to do. From our standpoint, or my personal standpoint, yes, there's been chatter about Thornton Burgess. But number one, it's a school building. And I think we're saying here, what I hear from Craig, if that's in your mix to make a great educational environment, the best one, then that's what it should be. It should never be out of your equation.
Perfect.
In my opinion, I think that's kind of what I heard from Craig. We're not holding your feet to the fire, hey, you want it back. You do what you have to do.
I think I was asking the flip side of that, and you don't have to. It's like, if you're like, and if you had a consensus that we will not take TWB back, we want TWB to stay in, then that narrows the options, you see. So I know we have an agreement with the town that goes till 2035, yeah. And so that's all I was trying to say, that if you're like, you know, if it's do what's the best for education and we'll make it work either way, then that's great. And it sounds that's like what you're saying, and that's exactly what we do.
Well, it's a tight budget time. We appreciate the $1 a year as well. So
Yeah.
thank you.
I just want to say one thing. I think that one of the big things we all need to do is keep in mind we're doing this for the students. And I think that their input is invaluable to this whole process. And I know that I have spoken to my kids and their friends and their friends' friends and asked them what they thought of different configurations of the schools. And every single one of them, surprisingly, was completely against 8th grade going to the high school. Every single kid, male or female, didn't matter. So I think that before we go and do something like that, unless it's the best cost-effective, ultimate thing we come up with, I think we need to get a bit of a survey or some input from the kids. Because, and I don't think it's that hard to, I mean, we could certainly get the kids that are in school, but I think alumni, and recent alumni, the last 4 years, and ask them what they think of that idea and what they went through going, I mean, COVID, you know, years were kind of a blur for a lot of them, but I think it would be interesting to get their input on that and the emotional trauma, I'll say, from going from one school to the next, like you're saying, these transitions, to take an 8th grader who's what, 12, 13, and put them in with 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who are 6'4" and have a beard. Just for example, it can be intimidating to some of those kids. So, not to pick on Craig's beard, but you know, that was one of the comments that got made. And so I'm just saying, I think we need to get some input from the kids. I like to listen to the people in town and what they tell me, and I listen to the kids too, and this is one of the things they told me. So I think they would like some input.
Well, on the flip side of that, I specifically reached out to a bunch of kids in middle school now, talked to their parents about this, and the consensus I was getting was the opposite. So maybe doing some poll would be great, because most of the families were excited that, wait, if we bring 8th grade to Minnechaug, first Minnechaug's Palace, right? But the second thing is, I can take some classes that are offered in high school. I can take them a little early. I can be involved in that. you know, there seemed to be an excitement. So, yeah,
So,
I mean,
so I brought that point up
Mm-hmm.
and talked to older kids who've been there.
oh, I didn't bring it, they brought it up to me.
But I'm just saying, talk to older kids who have been there and gone through it, and they have a very interesting perspective on that. It sounds cool when you're
So I think we
in
need to
eighth
do the
grade.
survey, because she has her sampling, I have my sampling, and we need to get the whole sampling.
Now, but I also wanted to ask, and I'm going to ask a question, John, that I kind of already know the answer to, and I'll be honest, you know, when I heard the option of 8th grade going to the high school, had a lot of your initial gut reactions where you said concerned, oh my God, the little kids are going to be beaten up by the big kids, oh, what's going to happen? I pulled my kids, I just happen to have a collection of children across multiple. I recommend it to anyone who, you know, has to bail out of college tuition. And I got mixed reviews from my kids. John, I'd love for you to talk to us all and tell us, you know, because I don't think I know we're not going to be the first school district that would ever have an 8th grade in a high school. What is the data? What has happened in other school districts that have done this?
Thank you for the question. So there are some other states where 8 through 12 is a more common model. In Massachusetts, it's less common. However, there is a region of the state where 8 through 12 high schools are becoming the norm. And that's on the Cape, because they're going through a lot of the same types of population shifts that we're experiencing here in Western Massachusetts. Did have a conversation with a superintendent of a school that was actually just built by the MSBA as an 8 through 12 high school. And that's what led me to him. I said, oh, I noticed you just had this building project for an 8 through 12. What can you tell me about it? What was your planning? And in the context of that, he shared with me about his school, some about how it's set up and the process they went through as communities. Actually, there are a lot of parallels. Two communities, one experiencing some reduction in population, the school-age population more so than the other. This was an effort to try to unify those communities. But in the context of it, he said, love to have you out to take a look at the school, and anyone else who wants to see what 8 through 12 could look like. But he said, you should spend a day or two and visit all my neighbors, because all of my neighbors are also in 8 through 12 models for the same reason of reduced school-age population. So one of the thoughts I have shared with the planning committee, and I've also shared with our high school administration, is that we should take a trip out to the Cape. We typically are on the Cape in November anyways for the MASS, MASC annual meeting. But I'd like to give people from our community an opportunity to view other communities, with well-respected districts that are running 8-12 models to see the different options. One thing he says, we each do it a little bit differently. So there are different ways of implementing an 8 through 12. But I would say based on that, it can definitely be done. It's not a crazy educational idea.
There was one thing, John, could you continue? Remember, we were thinking that if we were going to do this, we would take the 8th grade, put them in a bubble, keep them away from the other kids, water the flies, we don't want that happening, right? And John was saying that at these schools on the Cape, the opposite was what they ended up doing. Because, John, could you explain and get into that a little bit?
Sure.
I was fascinated by this.
So yeah, especially with respect to extracurriculars, as I mentioned, there are some curricular matchings that will just never work, which is why the space utilization becomes less efficient for different grades you bring in. But for example, if we could sync up the schedule so that there were options like a frozen block or something, so that for extracurricular activities, you have a very talented artist who really could benefit from being with some more accomplished artists in some high school classes, or a very accomplished musician who really needs to be with a group that's working on more challenging pieces, that they found that to be a benefit and kind of one of the selling points for the model for them. I'll also share, just since I have the floor, that he shared with some of his neighbors that in some of the neighboring districts, they had started just with an 8th grade academy and said, let's do it for a small group of students, like students who might be academically accelerated or whatever. And very quickly they made the decision that they really needed to get all the 8th graders over there. So based on the experience of my peers, I think it's something that could work for us.
One point, I think you made about the 8 through 12 model, option 2, if you will, that really you can do on your own because it doesn't involve any change in regional agreement. But I think from prior comments, it exacerbates the problem you're talking about now, where you say in your mind there's a discrepancy in the middle school model between the towns.
Yeah.
And then you're going to go ahead and give the 8th graders of Wilbraham the high school. So that when the 9th graders of Camden come in, they feel already, I don't know, you know what I mean?
Right.
So from that standpoint, just I'm down on that model from the beginning.
Yeah. I think that basically from the commentary, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Sean's comments earlier. I think in one, or the upbringing that everybody's mentioned, the K through 8 has worked in Green Meadow. I mean, to think 8 through 12 couldn't work here, I think we're foolish not to think that. And you know, I have 2 kids that will be going to high school. If I was going to a college and I said, do I get to spend a year at the middle school or a year here? Okay, I'd walk around and say, my kids are getting a year here. That'd be my choice. If I had a school choice option, that's where my kids would go. So from a parent's perspective, I couldn't agree more that I want my kids here. I think the other reality you have to look at is when you look at the dwindling enrollment is when my kids get into high school, we don't make a change. We're 40 to 45% probably school choice. And depending on who feels that's the best model, that's up to the community to decide. I think that's a reality to look at. I prefer my children to get an option to come to the best school, best learning environment we have for 8th grade, rather than allow folks from other districts to come in. So that's a thought. My second point would be, I think at some point in time, as towns, we need to come together and figure out this regional agreement, because what I get concerned about is it's us here in the room, Mike's point, make a decision about the students and the education, and not Dr. Provost and his staff and his team. So I think we have to come together and put the fate of the students and the education system in their hands, rather than us decide, well, if we do this, this isn't going to be good for us. And we'll only give you 8th grade, but not 6th, 7th, and 8th. Like, at some point, we just have to say, look, we're all in this thing together, and the faster we get to that point, and so that'll take a lot of convincing the towns. I think there's a lot of argument that we can make to make this work, and we're going to have to sell this to people, but show the benefits. If you bring folks from Hamden out here to see this school and show 8th grade students what they have options available to them, I think you'd have a much bigger sales pitch. So I think, again, I 100% believe that I want my kids to go 8th grade here, but as a whole, the towns, we need to get out of the way of this thing. If we made a decision at a regional school district, we need to let Dr. Provost and his staff decide the best interest of the kids and all these decisions. So
I think what we got from this group here is that in the 7 to 10 range is what we're shooting for. We don't want to do configuration number 2, which I don't know why it's not configuration number 1, but configuration number 2 is that would only be a worst case scenario to help with overcrowding in Wilbraham. For some reason, there was no change to the regional agreement. But other than that, I think 7 to 8 in that range is where we want to be.
So I like the 7 through 10, but I also like the other option that you were talking about earlier, where if we regionalize everything, what would that look like?
I mean,
would it be
7 to 10.
Pre-K through 1 at Green Meadows for everyone, what would it be for everyone? Because I think if you looked at that model, it probably would also reduce all of your bus routes, which is a huge savings, and then put that savings towards the programs and all that kind of stuff.
Having gone through this once, which I don't want to relive, but I do think it's important that we regionalize some of these. I would take a more moderate approach. I think the idea of regionalizing from 6 and up, giving the community a time to digest that and seeing how well it's worked. And then I think you can go back for a second bite of that apple. But I think if you ask them to make that big change all at once, you are going to get a lot of resistance. I don't know, that's just my take. But I think when you're talking about regionalizing from 6 to 12, and I think that might be the right number, those kids aren't as vulnerable, or at least somewhat, right? You're not sending your little 5-year-old kid with kids he doesn't know. I know that's not on the table here, but I just want to be clear, I have lost times. To me, the one that makes most sense is more along the lines of either 7 or one of those options, 7 through 10.
Well, sometimes Mark and I go back and forth during our meetings, so.
No, I'm gonna shut you off right now.
My point is that I think if you regionalize everybody, you get the community to realize that although we spend, Wilbraham's 80% of the budget, it's also 80% of Green Meadows' budget.
Right.
And they spend 19% on our budget. And I think if you had it as a regionalization, say, listen, we got to stop looking at town lines for a minute here, because this is a regional, and everybody's involved with every school. And if that gets the top tier education, then that's what we should do.
Have you talked about the case?
You just turn it towards them better.
I know
There
you
you go.
talked to the K schools at the K through 8 through 12. Have you talked to schools that are K through 12? I'm trying to, aside from the initial shock of making that change, I'm trying to see what a downside would be. Because at least for my child, at 5, 6 years old, when they go to school, they don't know almost anything, whether they're from Wilbraham or Hampton. So if they start at that age, it's the same newness to them. For better words, have you talked to K through 12 replies, and what are the downsides? Are there downsides?
So I have to say that I don't know, because I didn't look at their regional agreement, I just looked at their school configuration. Whether or not they were regionalized fully K through 12, they might have, they might still have a different kind of setup. They might keep students from one town in that town. I do know that some of the schools in that group that he was talking about are municipal, so we would see both regional and municipal schools, so we'd be able to look at that type of comparison. I think, really from my perspective at this point with the discussion of this memo, my focus was really around, how could the buildings be used for the students in the towns, rather than what would the verbiage of the agreement have to be. I think that's kind of the next step. Once we decide how we really want to educate our kids, then I think we write the agreement that says that.
This is still a hot stove issue for me, having gone through the last war. But listening to the configurations, I've run through in my mind what my experience was. Gee, I went through this grade and that grade, this school and that school, and I'm sure that most of the people sitting around this table have done something similar as they've listened to these configurations. And we're all here, we all came through different schools and different configurations, and they all worked, which leads to the conclusion that any configuration will work if it has the support of the community. So the issue is, what is it, do we do a Steve Jobs and tell the community what they don't know they even need yet? I mean, is that the approach? That's the tough sell. That was the sell the last time. It didn't work. Or is it bringing to the community what the community already knows that it wants, which is what? The best education that's possible? Right? I mean, isn't that what everybody wants for their kids, is the best education as possible? And how we go about achieving that is a detail. And, the regional agreement exists for a reason. There were concerns that both towns had at the time the original agreement was entered into, and subsequent amendments. And I likened it to the Constitution. It's not something that should be toyed with. It should not be taken lightly. It should not be addressed except in the most serious of terms. But the U.S. Constitution has 27 amendments. So there are reasons to change things. This amendment agreement has, I believe, the original, and I believe it was 3 amendments. Does that sound right? So the fact that, you know, amending the agreement is not an easy thing doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done. Matter of fact, that may be all the more reason to look at amending it. And, I mean, I've been in favor of a K-12 region before it was even discussed. I mean, there was a proposal years back for Mildtree to be the regional pre-K, K-1 school. That was back in the mid-90s. I mean, you know, this discussion has been ongoing for a good long while. But I think it comes down to the issue of the support. And the issue of support means people have to, number one, they have to agree and want what it is. Number two, they have to trust the people that are implementing this process. And that the last time around, the trust was in short supply. And that showed, at least at our town meeting. Even advisory was split on the vote for the last one. But I'm all in on revisiting the issue because I do believe schools need to become as efficient as possible. I believe the finances are going to only become more difficult in the coming years. I think there's all the more reason to squeeze all the efficiencies we can out of that. And in the process, I think we can also improve the education. Not only the education, but also the social experience that the kids are interested in having. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm willing to support a good faith effort to improve this system.
I should have asked this early on. How forward-looking are these options? I mean, are we talking about today? Are we talking about, because I don't care to make a change based on today's numbers. I care to make a change on the next 5 or 10 years. How forward-looking are we looking?
So we have received our next decade, next decade's worth of projections from NASDAQ, which everyone has felt was really accurate in projecting where we would be as we currently are. I think the projections were off by like less than 100 kids of where we would be 10 years ago. And those numbers looking forward are factored in. The story that tells is that we are right now at the lowest point our school enrollment will be, and that we're going to start building over the next several years. That building will come at the elementary level, so we will see younger students coming in because most of it will be through move-ins or through natural birth. We will still continue to see high school enrollment decline for a few years, even while the overall district enrollment is increasing because the declines at the high school won't be quite offset by or will be offset, but those gains will be coming in the earlier grades. So in these models, we've looked at making sure there's somewhat of a buffer to absorb those new kids who we're expecting. So I think all of these, to the best of our knowledge, just based on NASDAQ's projections, would set us up at least for the 10-year period that we're able to project populations.
Is that something that we can share with this committee, that report? Would the committee be interested in reading that? Yeah. Okay.
Sure, we'd be happy to do that.
Great, thank you.
So I guess I have a question, and it goes back to other people have asked it. What's the next step? What's next? Do you have responses from finance, advisory, select boards, agents, top of the table with that, if you will? Obviously, Don is representing us on your planning committee. I mean, personal favorites, I like 8 and 9. Because in my mind, they talk about the hot button things that John brought forward. Consolidating grade numbers, relieving overcrowding, treating the regionalization equally. You know, obviously, probably treating 9 because we bring back our verse to the use. But are you expecting us to go out and, wave the banner for it? Or are we waiting for more on your part? Okay, voting again. We put in a slip of paper. We're all going with number 14. That's our pick.
Well, we still have met with the community themselves and had a session where we let people from the community come, communities. I say community, I mean Hamburg, okay? have them come here, wherever, or do listening groups in both towns, or both. And just hear what the community is saying and what they think of whatever final options we narrow these down. And then with that, we can also give more perspective on the options and then hear what the community as a whole says, and then just kind of go back with the teachers and, maybe one big whatever, here's what we have, here's the option, here's the information, here's the financial part of it, here's everything, and then, finalize it, put it together.
And I agree with you. I mean, I said at the beginning, we have 20,000 people we work for.
Right.
I understand what Terry said about let's get the opinion of everybody. I'm not sure about the second graders. Greg will probably tell you they're interested in a better lunch choice, not necessarily standard.
But I also agree with that.
More pizza? Thank you. So, but yeah, all the stakeholders involved, everybody down to
I think
the kids.
alumni would be critical, getting some recent alumni's input on what their thoughts are.
We have a series of groups that we have plans to meet with to get, just like this. We're presenting the same possible configurations to each group. Every time we meet, we drill down a little bit further, have more discussions, but we want input from everybody, and then that will drive how we move forward and how we disseminate the information and where we go from there. So this is not the end of the road by any means.
John, I had a question for you. So would I know you favor options 8 and 9, and I find them also very palatable. What would you think of an amendment to the school agreement that regionalized from K to 12, knowing that the initial real-world application was going to end up being something like 8 and 9, but then leaving us as a group together, best equipped for what's going to happen in the future, which regrettably none of us can predict, although NASDAQ makes a very good attempt at it.
In my opinion, I think you're saying K through 12?
Yeah.
Well, all the grades in the district, so
It's too ambitious. It's too ambitious. I mean,
that's fair.
I think right now, if you present a plan that addresses some needs. Doug made a great point. This isn't a document that we, pencil changes to every year. But I think, what John has presented, and the school committee and the planning committee, needs they want to address. And it's great to take a big 30,000-foot picture of the whole thing, but I think that might be too much, in my opinion.
Bigger decision, harder it is.
Well, I don't say it's a selling thing, but you went through it before, but,
So let's spell out, what are the changes, what are the big drawbacks if we did a regional agreement between both towns, pre-K through 12? What are the downfalls of that? Are there any downfalls to it for either town?
Could be buy-in.
What is that?
Say again?
I think it could be buy-in, that's the problem, because I'm listening to everybody.
Buy-in as in convincing one town over the other?
Yeah, and having remembered, was it 5 years ago? And it was pretty powerful.
Sure, I recall, but I'm saying, what are the true drawbacks? Are there any drawbacks? Your kid won't learn as well as your kid. Is there a drawback to that pre-K through 12 agreement?
I think socially there could be issues. From at least there's a perception of that. I think
it's about loss of control and the
Yeah.
fact that if you are the smaller of the two groups.
Because this is what we're up against. If this is something we want to do, this is what we have to look at. We have to identify the pluses and the minuses and try to mitigate them. I don't see why, like you said, we are one. Hampton, Wilbraham, the kids don't see boundaries. The kids have friends in both towns. They don't care what town you're from. They don't care. So I think the adults need to get it out of their head. Hampton, Wilbraham, Hampton, and let's be one big team and get everybody on board so all the kids get the same experience, whether you're going to school at Green Meadow or you're going to school at Wilbraham Middle. Let's call it, I don't know, Falcon Middle School, but let's get on the same team because the kids already are there.
I think the selling point is going to be harder at the younger grade levels. And I think if you have a degree of success at, say, 6 to 12, it's a lot easier to sell to go back in 3 or 4 or 5 more years and say, we should do this throughout everything.
I'd like Dr. Provost to give us the numbers, not obviously right now, but how many people from Wilbraham are sending their kids to Green Meadows? Because I've talked to 3 families, I had no idea. They loved Green Meadows, and they live in Wilbraham, and they bring their kids to Green Meadows. So I'd like to know those numbers, because I bet you there's a bunch of people that would do that if they knew that they had that ability.
Really quick question. Didn't we just increase the school choice at Green Meadows because the class sizes were so small? Sean, do you know how many,
I'm sorry, say that
do you know how
question.
many school choice students we have today at Green Meadows? Roughly?
At Green Meadows, we just did these numbers.
I think we increased it last year.
School choice meaning Wilbraham kids going to Hanover?
No, that exists there now. It's not that many, isn't it? Like, yeah.
I could get those numbers and send them out to you.
I'm just curious.
But it's a handful, it's not like a classroom or.
But if we offered school choice outside of Wilbraham Hamden to other communities, what would be the concern with that Wilbraham student going to Green Meadow? Again, I'm trying
I
to
think
figure
the
out
issue is that if you have a young kid on the bus for an hour plus a day to school, an hour plus day back from school, that might be a bit much. I think that was the concern. Now, there's some different things that,
I'll touch on that. I have like a lot of thoughts right now that wouldn't happen in 5 minutes, but that happens now, currently, where most of the parents are driving their kids to school because of that bus ride thing. So that's why we have traffic backing up down North Road and out on the main streets, because they don't want a bus. So that's just a touch on that. It's happening now.
Yeah.
Can I just have the floor for one?
Sure.
I mean, I got a couple thoughts that go back like 5 conversations ago. So I'm going to be all over the place for a second, but I'm just going to back what Terry was saying, because I think it's going to be an easier sell to do pre-K through 12 as a regional district, because now you're a community, you're one. If we try to sell it as, a regionalization 6 through 12, now you're still segregating people, you're still pulling a dust against them type of thing. I'm
cherry picking.
Going back to when we were on the strategic committee, way back, we talked about, Terry and I were just kicking the idea about changing the name to Minnetonka Regional District, rather than Hamden Wilbraham. So now you're one community.
Get rid of the town names, get rid of the lines between us, we're one. Minnetonka Regional School District.
And personally, I think it would be a lot easier to sell it as a community aspect for the students, not to say, oh, hey, we're only going to do certain grades from here and there and out. Going pre-K through 12, I also don't think is going to affect the enrollment. I mean, you're still going to have, proximity to schools, so, Green Meadows may pick up more students in that aspect because now you're going down Burley and, parts of Main Street, Wilbraham and whatnot, coming to Green Meadows. I think, if we're going to push for it, we have to be all on board and all as, a unified front that, we need change, at the back, Doug, look into something, because obviously it's not working, but we're doing it.
Okay, I'll do it.
No, I was just.
Okay, good. Yeah. Sorry. Well, when it comes back to you.
I don't have a strong opinion in the moment about K through 12 or 6 through 12. The district has always been, Falcon, my parents were in the district, they taught in the district, and so it's always been one community to me, so it's hard for me to even think about it differently. But I think if we make that dramatic change to pre-K or K through 12, there has to be a lot, there's got to be trust.
Right.
I think that, and I don't know whether we're there yet or not, but that's the thing that was, I think, fear. It was fear about what was going to happen to our kids, and if we can't address those issues, I think it would fail. And so it might be more palatable to take the chance with a smaller group of kids who are older. Because I think if you have a plan that keeps kindergarten through 5th grade at Green Meadows as an example, but you give the school district all the flexibility in the world, I'd love to trust that you're not going to disrupt everything. And so I just don't know if we're there yet. And so maybe these community meetings will help you to figure out whether you are. But it was absolutely one of the most experience was our town meeting 5 years ago about this issue. I mean, like, shook me to my core, and I just don't think the community can stand that again. So you guys all have to be in a different place in terms of how people are feeling about whether they can trust the school district to make the right choices.
This is the first steps of this process, and that's why when we were talking, go ahead. Well, when we were talking before about, when we were talking before about trust and the things that happened before, I just want to point out one really important thing. Everyone around this table is in favor of some modification, either K through 12, which is a little more than half, roughly, because not everyone has spoken, and the other is, everyone is for the 6 through 12, right? So that right there shows progress. There is no one around this table who says, nope, we have to keep things, we're not gonna regionalize, we don't want to change the agreement, we want to keep things the way they were. That is the biggest, most positive thing I think that's come out of this. That we're right now talking either K through 12 or 6 through 12. You know, so that is positive. And what you're saying with trust and fear that hopefully we do this in the right way, which is another reason why this is something that we wouldn't have for next year. This is going to take a while to get buy-in from the 20,000, people in these, in this community. There you go. Sorry.
Wrote it down. First of all, I understand and acknowledge the difficulty in bringing in as many stakeholders as possible. Agree with bringing parents in. One thing to keep in mind there is I asked my at least for me, it's not easy because I have school-age kids to come out. So to the extent that you can get a survey in someone's hands, I think that should also be there. That would, building what Carol mentioned, I was at that meeting years ago, 5 years ago now. To kind of, I don't want to say read the room, but read the room in a way. Temperature of the interest level and to the extent that you can make it somewhat vague, but enough to see the mind, whether or not they're open to it. We have to, if we're getting creative, we have to keep one kid.
Yeah, can I just, I just want to kind of finish up or complete my thought about the buy-in. I do want to comment on what John and Carol are saying, 3 townies here, pretty much. So if you're going to be talking to voters, and we know that the majority of our voters are over 50, you cannot just say we're all going to work together. They've gone through a lack of trust, broken promises with regionalizations. So I think what I really want to emphasize is that they remember who the voters are. They're going to be over 50. That the trust has been broken, and it takes years and years to build that trust up. So I just want to kind of bring a little bit of a reality check, especially as we're talking about. I do agree with Carol that I think to do the whole thing at once, I think it's going to be a tough one. And if I remember back to 5 years ago, one of the biggest issue was with small kids and putting them on the bus. And not so much the length of time that people are going to be on the bus with. And it's, again, that fear is more, I think, geared towards the smaller kids. So.
John, do you have anything? Well, if no one has anything else. Okay, very good. Take a second.
Second.
Okay. So we'll move on to Don.
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.